Hello, everyone. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. My name is Drew Clark. I'm the editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. Super happy to welcome you to this discussion. If you're here for the discussion about BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, and mapping challenges, you're in luck because next week we're going to have more than 7 state broadband officials joining us. That was going to be today. We pushed it to the 31st. And again, it's going to be we hope, very exciting discussion about BEAD, broadband mapping, and the challenge process, and hope that you'll join us that week, as many of you join us every week. I'm posting on the chat link our upcoming events. These are our Broadband Breakfast Live Online. We have the next 4 weeks on that page. We'll be talking about Congress, net neutrality and privacy on the 7th, and then quantum computing and broadband the week after. And I want to particularly call out the Broadband Measurement Summit that will take place on March the 7th, Thursday, March the 7th. Our event next week on broadband mapping and BEAD is in some ways a precursor to that in-person event on March 7th here in Washington, the Broadband Measurement Summit. The link for that is in the chat window, and hope you'll join us there. We will be announcing a webcast of that a little bit later on. We're going to be announcing another very exciting upcoming event just now. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone that Broadband Breakfast is a news community around better broadband, better lives. We care about the infrastructure and the applications that make high-capacity internet work. And we do reporting on these subjects every business day, and we do this free Broadband Breakfast Live Online every Wednesday at noon. And we wouldn't be able to do these events without the support of our sponsors. We want to give a thanks and shout out to those. They include Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Comcast, SmartWave Technologies, Wesco, Coos Systems, the Community Broadband Networks Initiative of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, California Emerging Technology Fund, Broadband Toolkit, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, and Michael Baker International. Thank you to our sponsors for their support. And I also want to just remind those of you who are regulars, or if you're new to Broadband Breakfast, welcome. Welcome to broadbandbreakfast.com or the streams that we're streaming on. We are about to relaunch our website at Broadband Breakfast, hopefully by next week. So please stay tuned, look for that. And we're very excited and hope it will be an improved experience for everyone. Well, with that, let's go ahead and introduce our guests for today's program. We have Jeff Pulver, in some ways needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway, and Glenn Richards. And we're going to be talking today about the 20th anniversary of the Pulver Order, which was issued on February 12th, 2004. And the Pulver Order is, of course, named after Jeff Pulver and Pulver.com. He's going to tell us more about all of that. But let me just give a little bit more context on Jeff, who, great friend, and thank you for being with us and talking about this exciting anniversary event that you're going to be hosting on February the 12th, Monday. But just a little bit about Jeff again. He's a tech industry icon, a pioneer in the voice over internet protocol field, and a leading advocate for internet freedom. In the late 1990s, he saw the potential for VoIP to revolutionize telephony and telecommunications, and he founded Vonage, one of the first VoIP service providers. As VoIP gained traction, he got resistance from traditional telcos and regulators, and that's why he took on the establishment with the Pulver Order, or seeking a ruling in the Pulver Order. So that's just the very basics of Jeff. He's obviously done many other things since then, but I'm so glad to see he's returning to his telephony and telecommunications roots, and bringing these to bear in the February 12th event here in Washington. So Jeff, welcome, and tell us a little bit more about your thoughts 20 years after the Pulver Order. And make sure to unmute yourself. Okay, you're there you go.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having myself, having Glenn, and when we do things in our lives, we don't necessarily think about the long-term impact. Sometimes it's just the here and now. And I remember distinctly in 2003 feeling a need to get clarity about the future of communications. I was fearful at the time about broadband and the way that certain entities might want to monopolize the use of it. And I really just wanted to put down, get regulatory clarity that voice communication that originates on broadband that doesn't touch the legacy phone network, for it not to be regulated, or at least regulated as telecom. And I was most focused really on, computer to computer communications. I was most focused on applications like this, where, our phones these days are computers, and I had no idea about the journey that we will have, nor the impact of having this. But Glenn and his team were quite a powerhouse of not only collecting the thoughts behind the idea originally and helping to, and then filing it, but then over the course of the year, what happened. And it's one of those cases where if you don't know you can do something, anything is possible. And I didn't realize how impossible it is to. And I never asked for this to be in my name. It was a freewheel dial-up. Freewheel dial-up was the platform that I had started, which had probably about 1 million subs by then, and it was end-to-end IP. And we were just looking to maintain. And so when we said end-to-end IP, that's interconnected computing. And we were looking to make. I was looking to make sure that would remain unregulated, or at least not regulated as telecom. And anyway, it was a whirlwind. It still is. I never thought about what the positive effects would be, not only in getting it passed, but how many companies would prosper from it and how many industries would benefit from it. And when I looked at the calendar and I realized that last year was the 20th anniversary of the filing, and then I realized that 2024, we have, on Lincoln's birthday, no less, the anniversary of it getting of it being issued by the FCC, of it being ruled on by the FCC. And when you look at the days of your lives, you look at days that you remember, and that's 1 year and 1 day for sure that I'll never forget. And I am eternally grateful to Glenn Richards and Bruce Jacobs and really the entire team of people that helped make that happen. And I'm really excited to be seeing and having a fireside chat with the former FCC chairman, Michael Powell. In my opinion, this is one of the best positive rulings in regulatory history that helped open up voice over IP as a global industry, and so many others benefited. And I'm in awe of the fact that it happened, and I want to remember this day and help celebrate it, and really just take a moment out of our lives and to look back at what happened and look forward to what will be. So I'm very grateful to be here today to talk about what we're doing in Washington on February 12th.
Jeff, let's just paint the picture a little bit more. Back in 2004, what was the extent of the opposition you were facing, either domestically from incumbent telecommunications companies or internationally? Could you just kind of, again, tell us what it was? Those who weren't there, educate us. What was it like, and why were you so fearful?
I'll just take you. I have to go back 10 years before that. So before I got involved in this world of telecom, which again, I'm a ham radio operator since 1975. My only knowledge of the Federal Communications Commission comes from Part 97.3, which is amateur radio law. As a ham operator, I had to learn the rules and regulations to be an amateur radio operator. And in 1994, I started exploring communicating on the internet. I was playing with CUC-Me, and I discovered that a product called Internet Phone would soon be available. Ironically, it launched, I believe, on February 12th, 1995. And I immediately created a mailing list for people who were as enthusiastic as I was to talk on the internet. And as a ham operator, one of the things that I did was play with phone patches and just loved interconnecting radios and telephones together. And by just sheer willpower and some good luck, I launched the original version of Free Roll Dial-Up in October 1995. And I truly did not have a business plan. There was no purpose other than to have fun with it. Connecting enthusiastic hobbyists who would set up a certain configuration to allow calls to go through their computers to make phone calls. And there was no quality of service. It was anything but good, but it did work sort of. And so that launched. And about 6 months in March of 1996, out of the blue, 300 phone companies in the U.S. Filed a petition at the FCC known as the ACTA petition that asked for the sale and use of internet telephony software to be banned in America and the makers of the software to be regulated as a phone company. And I was laughing and then startled because people on this mailing list were asking me what was I going to do about it. And I had no intention of doing anything about it because I did not know what I was getting myself into. And I had a day job. I had no standing at the FCC. I was a person, but I was a ham operator, and that was it. But I coined the term VON in 95 to stand for voice on the net and video on the net. So as on a lark, I said, okay, you know what? Let's create. I polled the people on the mailing list, and there were about 110 companies represented. So and they all said, okay, let's say no. So I created the Voice on the Net, or VON Coalition, in March of '96, and Bruce Jacobs, which was one of Glenn's partners, he saw me at Columbia University, feeling very sorry for me, realizing I did not know what I got myself into, and he offered to provide help and guidance. And he guided me through the whole ACTA stuff, and I'm so happy that no one acted on ACTA. But it kind of showed me that we're at a moment in time between innovation and disruption, and we were truly a foreshadowing of what would be. But we itself, I mean, I literally invented or co-invented the gateway, although I never exerted my prior art on any of the innovations that happened forthwith afterwards. But that was in my mind, and just to take you through time, Drew, that happened. I was let go of my job on Wall Street, which saved my life actually, and I started a conference series called, the first one was called The Talking Net. That was on September 10th and 11th, 96, and then I called the event VON, which the first VON was April 97. And that gathering became the trade show and conference for what became the voice over IP industry. And we experienced 9/11, we experienced the dot-com crash and the telecom crash. And in 2002, my own observations was that certain communication companies wanted to dominate Wi-Fi. But it became clear that with WiMAX not going anywhere, that certain companies would be frustrated. Ultimately, Wi-Fi would almost be free. And I was afraid broadband was next. And I was really worried about the future. I wanted to maintain a greenfield opportunity for innovation, maintain a place for entrepreneurs to do the impossible, and to keep that greenfield opportunity open to the world. And so that's what we did. And I thought, okay, that sort of came from a dream. I mean, I was like losing sleep over this. And so I reached out and I asked a simple question: can we ask for a proactive ruling? And it turns out you can. And it took a few weeks to put it together, and Glenn spearheaded everything. And we filed it. You know, surprisingly, it's by the way, it's not a short thing. If you put together a proposal, if you put together what we did, not everyone's request goes out for public comment. Ours did. And then for the next 30 days, there was a lot of opposition. There were very few people that were kind to what we were doing. Most people said no. They thought they just said no because it should be attached to another proceeding or this or that. And a few people said yes, but most people, either individually or from a company perspective, all said no. And then we in April had a chance to to reply back, and then a couple of government agencies in May, I think, of 2003 said no. And I'll let Glenn tell that part of the story. But it was fascinating, and I'm happy. So, and again, I'm telling you, if anyone would have told me how impossible it was, I may have been stubborn enough to go forward anyway. But I just love the fact that it happened, and there was enough drama in there to make a good movie. And I believe that it turns out there's some very smart people out there that do policy work, that can think into the future and understand, what good policy is. Because in our case, the ruling not only affected the United States, it was adopted by many countries around the world. Since the ruling came out 20 years ago, I've been contacted by or in communication with many different communication authorities, and they all look to the Pulver Order as a case which they went, in their opinion, the right direction.
Well, that's great to get that additional history of that decade preceding the Pulver Order. We'll talk a little bit now, just now, about the decades since the Pulver Order. But first, let's just stick in the present, so to speak, the period right around 2003, 2004. You've mentioned Glenn as the kind of author. Talk us through your take on the kind of regulatory stakes. And your thoughts as Jeff approached you about wanting to do a declaratory ruling, right? That's what this was, wasn't it? And make sure you're unmuted, or you're unmuted there.
Unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
First of all, thank you, Drew, for including me, and Jeff. Always good to see you. You know, the decision to use a declaratory ruling, I think, was ultimately the right one. It's a process that the FCC does not really have to rule on, but I think that the time frame was particularly complicated because there were a lot of moving parts at the time. Jeff mentioned the ACTA petition, which was, the competitive phone carriers attempting to impose regulation on this sort of burgeoning and nascent internet telephony industry. At the same time, Vonage was getting a lot of press for its activities. If you remember back then, Vonage was heavily advertising its internet phone service. There was a proceeding going on in Minnesota that the Minnesota Public Utility Commission was attempting to regulate Vonage as a phone company. The FCC had started a proceeding on IP-enabled services. So we had all of these various things going on at the same time. And so I think the decision was made, with Jeff. I think there was a bit of hesitation when Jeff first approached us about this idea, because, sometimes the regulatory strategy is you don't want to ask a question you don't know the answer to. We really weren't certain how the FCC would rule on this, what the response would be for industry. But I think we got lucky a little bit from a couple of perspectives. Number one, most critically, I'm not sure any other chair other than Michael Powell would have given us the same relief. I think the easier path for the FCC to have taken at that time would have been not to rule on our petition and to roll us into this larger proceeding on what to do about IP-enabled services. So from that perspective, Michael sort of went out ahead and kind of maybe went out a bit on a limb. If you look at the docket, two of the commissioners, Copps and Adelstein, raised concerns in the decision. One suggesting, what was the rush to do this, suggesting that it should have been rolled up. But also, the one we may not have foreseen as much, which was law enforcement basically saying, are we going to be able to wiretap this? And it was the use of the CALEA statutes that raised probably the biggest concern that at least I had. Maybe Jeff has shared that as well. I don't think it was something we really thought about when we filed it, that would be probably the biggest hurdle we had. I think folks were less worried about the competitive landscape, given the usage was going to be limited, at least under the fax to computer. I don't think people really saw it as a replacement for phone service. Excuse me. But I think the bigger concern was when law enforcement weighed in and said, how are we gonna tap this? What access are we gonna have to this communications? And funnily enough, 20 years later, I think law enforcement is still grappling with those questions on how to deal with digital technologies, right? I mean, encrypted technologies. So I think I was most worried that, that was going to be the hurdle we weren't going to be able to get past. But, again, Chairman Powell, thought that this was important to get this clarity, thought it was important not to roll us into the larger proceeding. And eventually, it was a couple of years after Jeff's order, the Pulver Order came out, that the FCC actually dealt head on with the issue about applying the law enforcement, the CLIA statutes to, at that time, interconnected VoIP, which arguably this is not interconnected VoIP. So, those were my recollections. But I'm glad Jeff gave the ACTA petition and the creation of the Vaughn Coalition backstory, because frankly, I think it was that history that informed us, that suggested if we don't do something proactively, we could be, dragged into and regulated in a way that we didn't want. So I think ultimately it was the right decision. I think over time, it's really sort of worked itself through in a way that I think if anyone used a service like this during the pandemic, and it can appreciate why it's not regulated, why you can actually have free offerings. I think a lot of that probably arose because of the decision in the Pulver Order.
So let me just ask, the ACTA petition, who was ACTA? And you called them competitive carriers. Were they different from the U.S., kind of what U.S. Telecom?
This was the predecessor to CompTel, actually, Drew. I mean, CompTel now Encompass. I mean, this was not the incumbents. ACTA was made up of the primary resellers and the non-incumbents at that time. And eventually, if I recall, actually, Rob McDowell was the lawyer for ACTA, who eventually became, appointed to the FCC as a Republican commissioner. But that was ACTA was not the incumbents, but it was all the resellers and all the non-incumbents that were competing in the long distance market that saw the threat here. And if people could offer services for free, who would want to pay for their services? So, I mean, I think that was the threat that they saw back then.
And the more traditional landline incumbents, Houston, others, were they also opposed? So were you opposed by everyone? Was it that kind of situation, Glenn and Jeff?
Well, first of all, I learned the word Luddite. I didn't know what the Luddite meant until I heard about the ACTA petition, and then I realized that a certain person, with all good humility, certainly acted in a way which taught me about innovation versus keeping things the way they are, and I respect that. And at the same time, it was always fun to make fun of, or at least to have fun with. And in terms of who was against us, it really felt like almost everybody was against us. There's the nice part is you can go on the FCC website and look at the comments. They're old now. They go back 20 years, but you can see who was in support, who wasn't. And it was maybe political at some points, but really, it's so many. I mean, if you think, by the way, if you think about the pandemic, and as Glenn was saying, of how many people around the world who worked from home, stayed from home, studied from home, if they didn't have the ability to freely communicate like this, I think the quality of life around the world would have been much worse. And that services like that were created because of the Pulver Order to this very day have changed the way we work and live. And so in terms of who's against us, I mean, I felt everyone and then no one. I mean, at the end of the day, the Pulver Order transformed the telecom industry. I remember a meeting I had at Verizon in 2015, and I was in the boardroom, and I was told, look around the room, because I walked into the door, and I walked through the door, and a few minutes later, someone said to me, "Congratulations, you won." And I didn't know what I was winning or what they were talking about. This is 2015, and they said, look around the room. Ever since 2004, we acquired they acquired I guess Yahoo and AOL and this and that, and they said the passing of the Pulver Order transformed Verizon from a telecom company to a data company. And that's the kind of impact that we had, both tactically and strategically. And I would like to think that so many new things are now have happened because of that. And so people who might have been against us ultimately all benefited, really. So it was a good thing. And the other thing we should mention is that, I was doing this with Glenn. There was no one backing us. This was me on crusade, if you will, looking to protect the future. I was independent of that. And that's why I would encourage as many people as possible to join us at the National Press Club on February 12th.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that, Jeff. We want to make sure we get a full picture. What is happening on Monday, January 12th? You can, from the link to this event, go to it. But Jeff, tell us just more about who's going to be there and the panels that are going to be part of it.
Well, so it's February 12th, and it's at the National Press Club. It's a breakfast, by the way. If you like broadband breakfast, well, you could have. We could be talking about broadband stuff at breakfast, and I think I think the registration opens at 8:15. We're going to the panel. We're going to be opening with a fireside chat with former Chairman Michael Powell, and then Glenn and I have a couple of panels to do, and we're still confirming all the panelists, but we're going to have a look back. And for people that are into telecom law and regulatory law, we have a chance for the first time ever, and perhaps never again, a chance to hear what was going on behind the scenes during the course of the year that we were pleading for what became the Pulver Order. And there was pushback, by the way. Certain states certainly didn't like what we were doing, and perhaps certain companies did not understand our intentions. But it was fun. So we're gonna have one panel, which is a look back with people who were very active at that moment in time, in that time frame, and then we're gonna have a panel looking forward, looking at the issues from today going forward. And I truly would want to encourage anyone on this call, or anyone who ever hears this call, if you have an idea for regulatory action to protect the future, despite what anyone ever tells you, go for it, because you never know the good that will happen if you pursue something which you just feel like you must do. So I am someone who's incredibly driven to help encourage people's ideas to be heard, and yes, good policy can happen. It is possible.
So let's talk a little bit about what the future has, how it did impact the future. Like what did the 2 decades since then bring, besides this very interesting conversation you recounted at Verizon in 2015? And both of you, Jeff and Glenn, what are your take on what was resolved and the impacts of that, and maybe things that weren't resolved by the Pulver Order?
I'll start. I mean, I think, so you have to remember simultaneously the FCC was dealing with this Vonage petition. So Vonage basically said, we've got this internet-based phone service. The state of Minnesota wants to regulate us, and the commission, in its infinite wisdom there. So just, a little bit of maybe in the weeds, but the decision in the Pulver Order determined that this computer-to-computer type of technology would be an unregulated information service, which is a defined term in the Communications Act, which basically suggests the FCC is not going to regulate it and prohibits the states from regulating it. In the Vonage decision, where they were dealing with something that was more like a replacement phone service, now we call it interconnected VoIP, the FCC said, we're going to preempt state regulation of that service because it's of the interstate nature of the service. It's difficult for the service providers to actually know where people are that are using the service. It's available over any broadband connection. So I think, Drew, it's the combination of those two orders that then really spearheaded sort of the development of these technologies. You fast forward a few years, and just a few years back, WebEx got a declaratory ruling from the FCC that the voice components where you could actually physically dial in on a phone to these types of technologies, even those wouldn't be subject to universal service. That sort of the entirety of that service was considered an information service. I think that was a direct response to the decisions the FCC made in the Pulver Order. So people allowing these types of calls to be, free from, burdensome taxes, burdensome regulatory obligations, and keeping the states from being able to regulate, having to deal with 50 state regulatory bodies if you're offering these, integrated services. So I think that's been the issue. What's unresolved, I still represent, thank goodness, the Bond Coalition.
Let me jump in on this. So to be clear, is VoIP an information service or not an information service?
We have to be very careful about what kind of VoIP we're talking about. So we talk about non-interconnected VoIP. I would suggest what we're doing right now is non-interconnected VoIP. It's computer to computer, using the infrastructure on our computers. Interconnected VoIP, which is, if I could, I'll just bring over my phone. This is my desk phone. Here is an interconnected VoIP service that has not been ever classified by the FCC as a telecommunications service or as an information service. The FCC has used its authority under Title I to impose obligations on a case-by-case basis, federal obligations, because the states are still preempted. So you have to sort of be very specific as to the kind of voice over IP that we're talking about. We argue with the Bond Coalition that nomadic VoIP, which is anything that's available via various devices over any broadband network, should be free from state regulation. And to this date, the FCC is yet to classify nomadic or interconnected VoIP as a telecom or as an information service.
Jeff, what do you have to add on that? Yeah.
Well, I'll just add as far as the impact, I can tell you specifically that because I know the players, that the passing of the Pulver Order helped the investors in Skype do quite well, because once the Pulver Order was passed, Skype was sold to eBay, and certain people made a lot of money, and that continued. I mean, the telecom industry is about $2 trillion in value, and a lot of it is attributed to to voice over IP. The passing of the Pulver Order gave a green light to innovation. It gave a green light for companies to start buying VoIP products, voice over IP based equipment. It created an amazing opportunity for system integrators. And here, where I am right now, there's a lot of hyper-connected data centers. And the folks that are in the data business and the big pipe business and the submarine cable business, they will prosper tremendously because of the high demand for data. And so we happen to have been an accelerant for an industry which I didn't even know existed, which was the hyper-connected data centers, because 20 years ago, they weren't really like that. And it's also should be shared that, in a world that has close to 8 billion people, we now have the ability to bring the world closer together. That we can bring that people can talk to people in a way we never could before. And I would like to think that there's some positivity in families being able to connect and have a positive effect, not only on a business perspective, but a personal perspective. But yes, literally trillions of dollars of value have been created due to the passing of this Pulver Order. I mean, it's crazy, phenomenally amazing. And so this is a very hidden reality. I mean, many people have growing up, people that are, teenagers are growing up in a world where they can use apps and talk for free, not realizing that long distance was once their grandparents paid money to make phone calls, even long distance, even their own city. And now we're in a different paradigm. And so, to forget about the past, I figure, is a mistake. So we should honor it and look to this as a platform for future innovation. As Glenn was saying, the Bond Coalition is still around. Glenn is running it. He's the executive director, and there are issues of the day that comes up. And I don't know. I really didn't realize the impact that this would have. I was literally looking in just one corner of my eye, looking to keep the creative vision open for broadband innovation, not realizing that telcos would say, okay, we're going to give up telecom. We'll go to the data side. And then all these other companies and these innovators and entrepreneurs would get in different parts of the ecosystem. And so in telecom right now, elements of VoIP dominate the $2 trillion global marketplace. And the work that Glenn did has had a significant impact in wealth creation around the world.
So we have a question here, and I want to keep encouraging other questions here. We'll go as long as we've got something to say up until 1 o'clock. This question from MS says, does this discussion have room for pro-regulation voices, values, and arguments? For example, can regulation of new technology be good? Save the future. So I want to definitely get both of your take on this.
I saw the question in MS, definitely. I mean, we are not the anti-regulation people. I think we are I think we are generally the light touch regulation people. And I think appropriate regulation, which is what the FCC has done for interconnected VoIP, is probably makes sense. So, whether it's requiring VoIP providers to provide 911, requiring VoIP providers to protect the privacy of their consumers' information, requiring VoIP providers to contribute to universal service. So there are lots of obligations that the FCC has imposed after analyzing, the benefits and the public interest benefits of those regulations. And that's on interconnected VoIP. So to the extent that, you pick up a VoIP phone, you can dial 911 now. I think that's probably good policy. That wasn't the circumstances when these services came out in the early 2000s. That said, I think that what we were pushing back against was all regulation. And I think that it's the level playing field arguments, which, because they're regulated like this, you need to be regulated like that. So I think the Vaughn Coalition, my own personal sort of regulatory philosophy, let's talk about it. Let's look at the costs. Let's think about whether it makes sense. I would argue it doesn't make sense on this service to require a dialing out of 911. I would suggest that there's lots of arguments to be made around certain regulatory obligations on this service, which is not like an interconnected VoIP service. So I think you have to be thoughtful about the types of services that are provided, look at the benefits of regulating those services, and ask yourself whether the cost of imposing those regulations actually outweighs eventually the benefits. So I don't think anyone would ever argue that everything needs to be unregulated in all forms. I just think it needs to be thoughtful.
So the question, maybe behind the question that I feel I need to ask is, what is the Pulver Order done to create the world of net neutrality and the debate we have at this moment about net neutrality? Because 20 years ago, lots of people were, oh yeah, light touch, and in some ways, the no net neutrality regulations was kind of the policy. Now, interestingly, and perhaps former Chairman Powell will have something to say about this when he's at your event on February 12th, but he articulated in, I believe, 2004, or maybe 2003, the 4 freedoms idea of net neutrality, yeah. Right? And so I'm just wondering, Jeff, what is your view about what this petition, the Pulver Order, says about that debate that hadn't yet crystallized around net neutrality, but is now a hugely partisan debate that kind of changes every time we have a new administration?
Well, I'm happy to say that I've always been on one side of the table of the debate, and the people I oppose have changed positions, literally flip-flopped on the other side of the table. People who were with me are now on the other side. Sometimes the other side comes to my side. I've never moved. For people who follow these things, in the year 2000 and the year 2001, in the years prior to us pursuing the Pulver Order, I actually hosted the first ever internet freedom rallies on the steps of the U.S. Capitol on arguably the hottest days of the summer in both those years. And the first year we had a few hundred people come out. The second time we did it in 2001, we had a few thousand. We even had some rock bands, and it was amazing, because I was worried about I think it was HR 1542 at the time was the first one, and I was taking what was happening in the Senate seriously, and I was worried about all our freedoms being taken away and our ability to use the internet as a new platform for innovation. In terms of those 4 freedoms that Chairman Powell spoke about, I like. And I have, if people have issues with net neutrality, usually it's really business issues they're talking about. They're just masking it under the term net neutrality. And at the end of the day, it's a definitional thing more than anything else. People get so worked up about this, and I have been in the past worked up about this. But growing up as a kid, I remember that we had, if you will, a telephone in our house, and then when I had a business, somehow a business phone that looked just like a consumer phone charged. There was more money for it. I never knew why. It was the way it was marketed, and I accepted it. And I remember that if I wanted to have more bandwidth and more this, more that, you pay for it. And I don't really, I'm more concerned about the entire United States having connectivity. I'm worried about everyone who wants to be able to communicate, have the ability to communicate. In terms of what's relevant now, in terms of net neutrality, in terms of data traffic and stuff, the positive side is everyone's doing so well that they can afford to fight about this. That if one app is driving traffic, that means that people are paying for things, which means there's money on the table. And if there's a business model that finesses one policy over the other, it's I'm not against having conversations, but I'm looking for purpose and intention. And I've discovered in 20 years of with almost 30 years now of going to Washington or meeting different people that not everyone's intention is what it is. It's not everyone. Sometimes people are playing a game. It's like a movie or a mystery. And I think at the end of the day, we should listen to what Glenn was saying, that we're here looking for good policy. I never said I was against policy. In fact, I am very grateful that the Pulver Order happened. I did not ask, by the way, to become a subject down in Washington, but it is a nice way to talk at cocktail parties.
Just to be clear, and I didn't recall the date until I just Googled it. February 8th, 2004 was the day of former Chairman Powell's speech at Silicon Flatirons on this topic. And so that was 4 days before issuing the Pulver Order. He kind of laid out these 4 principles of net neutrality. And again, access content, run applications, attach devices, obtain service plan information. The service plan information is the one that is the law, that hasn't been changed by this whole back and forth over the litigation over net neutrality. But I guess the question, and again, I'm sure we can have another discussion about net neutrality on February 7th, but for you two who were so instrumental to this Pulver Order piece, which I just can't sort of think of outside of this context. Do you view that as kind of, do we have net neutrality today, or do we not have net neutrality today? Jeff, and if you're willing.
I mean, I think Glenn is not going to say anything, and with respect, I understand. But I mean, look, Drew, from some side of it is, if I'm a corporation and I'm servicing, I don't know, millions of customers, and I need to have 20 gigabits of data, and I need that fast, I'm probably going to pay a premium for it. Because my business will suffer if I only have a small pipe. But in that opinion, as a business owner, if I could afford to have a bigger pipe, I'd have a bigger pipe. Now, should my data be prioritized on a packet basis ahead of someone else's? I don't know. I can tell you what happened at Vonage, that when certain carriers were discriminating against us, and they looked at our packets and they dropped them because they had a competitive offering. That I didn't like. So if people are using these rulings to create competitive advantages and create competitive disadvantages, I would fight for where things are being wrong. But if you're building a business and you have a need for a data capacity that's well excessive of what a normal customer is these days, I mean, in Scandinavia, it was typical to have a gig to the house on broadband. We didn't get a gig to the house for many years later. And so, if you have a business need for stuff, because I frankly don't know why a consumer would necessarily, unless you're going to have a house of lots of kids playing lots of games and lots of other things. So, I think from a business perspective, it's not net neutrality. What we want is fair pricing. And we need alternative ways to provide connectivity. And that's happening these days because certain people are unstoppable, because if you don't have it by land, you have it by sky. And eventually, maybe things will happen that way. But in terms of from a personal perspective, I don't like companies which are purposely dropping people's packets because they have a competitive product against them. That's where I draw the line. Other than that, I don't call it net neutrality. I call it business. And I just hope again that future policymakers have the open mind and the foresight to enable entrepreneurs to be creative, because by doing good policy, we were able to drive dreams forward. And you never know necessarily the positive impact good policy has. And in this particular case, I've just, I'm in awe of all the people that have benefited from what we did, not realizing what was at stake. Because let me tell you, if this didn't get passed, I think the pandemic would have been a horrible experience. And I think that people in these hyper-connected data centers would not be doing the kind of business they're doing. And I think it might have been a very draconian world. And so we kept the light on for everybody, and I'm grateful for that.
So in the last couple of minutes, let me just raise two more topics that hopefully we can get Glenn to weigh in on. One is changes to the Universal Service Fund. Okay. And as you're certainly well aware of, there's a looming issue of the Affordable Connectivity Program and its potential expiration as it's used up in April. Kind of behind that, of course, is the question of changing the Universal Service Fund system of contributions, as well as just kind of robocalls and mitigating harms from robocalls. So Glenn, would you just tackle the USF question and how you see the VoIP revolution, if I may use that word, impacting the Universal Service Fund dynamic?
I'll bring to this my perspective from the Bond Coalition perspective on contribution. I'm not here to. I won't address the other side of this, the funding side. I'll address the. We tend to represent contributors to universal service, and for folks that may not be familiar with that, you see these line items on your bill. At least for telecom and VoIP services, the number now is somewhere around 35%. I think there's
really
that is going to get up to 40%.
35%. Paying a 35% tax on every. Yeah, I mean this is kind of the hidden shocker, right? And so
I did not know. Oh my God! Wow.
So what does that do to this marketplace, Glenn?
Supporting, the $8 billion in expenditures for the various universal service programs. So I think, I don't see an appetite for the FCC to do something without congressional guidance. But I think that, the Bond Coalition supported, they were one of 300 and something others groups to sign on to a letter that advocated for the inclusion of broadband as a contributing service. I mean, there are some estimates that by including revenue from broadband into universal service funding, that would drop that 35% to probably into single digits. And so I think does that solve the problem? I don't know. I understand the affordability issue. I think that there's probably ways that you can exempt low-income people or folks that get ACP or other funds from having to pay the universal service charge. So I think, the one easier, and nothing is easy, fix would be to start including broadband revenues as accessible. The other issue that we're active on, you mentioned robocalling, very diverse issues. But the Bond Coalition is on the board of the STIGA, which is the governing authority that is working and, oversees the framework for Stir Shaken. We have been very active on all of those dockets, understanding, respecting that everyone just hates robocalls and robotexts. And so Bond back to MS's question, are some regulations good? I mean, I think that, everyone is working together to try to eliminate robocalling without impeding and blocking, legitimate texts and phone calls. That's the challenge. And so, back to good regulation, I think that, we want to be smart about this. We want to try to figure out solutions that won't otherwise impede, wanted phone calls and texts. So we are in the weeds on the robocall issues. And again, be in the weeds as long as the commission wants to investigate those issues.
Well, does the fact that the Pulver Order arguably contributed to this world of free telephony kind of have any kind of downside or dark side in encouraging robocalls. Jeff, do you want to tackle that?
Well, on a protocol level, the reality is that spoofing became very easy. Again, give someone a set of tools. If people have bad intentions, they will they may go in the wrong direction. They'll put things in harm's way. But it's the people behind the technology, not the technology itself. I mean, and that goes in the history. So in terms of what people do and how they abuse the system, again, that goes to the bad actors.
Right.
Does the advent of one technology impede something else? I mean, I have a slightly different, probably explosively political thing to say, which I'll not say, but other than to say that maybe if you look at the origins of universal service and how it started and what the world looked like back then, rather than tacking on one thing versus the other, maybe by 2030, 2040, 2050, some point, maybe tomorrow, we might want to look at what universal service in an internet world really should look like and find ways that everybody's happier so that money comes through in the world that we're living in rather than the past, because there's a lot of living legacy. There's a lot of legacy in telecom. The codecs we use go back to the 1930s. HD voice is still not standard, and that was introduced only in 2008 by some work that myself and some others did. And you look at regulatory policy, I'm happy where we're going. I just think that if we take a look at universal service and stuff like that, why don't we have real universal service? Why are our 911 our public safety access points, why don't we upgrade them with voice and broadband and connectivity and save more lives? Why do we have to have backward compatibility? What about forward-looking capabilities? And so I think with the technology that's been evolved, we could do so much more. And if we had some funding for it, we could save more lives. And so I'm just saying that maybe some things that are part of the ecosystem, we want to maybe think about how to be more efficient in what it does, and maybe have far-reaching ideas on raising the standard of living because those services exist.
What about the point that I've heard you make before about charging or having charges for phone calls? Could you speak to that?
I'm totally in favor of going to a calling party pays model, so that, yes, to get over the fact that people could originate a call into the network for free, so there's no harm to them other than annoying us. If we could find a way to properly make it so at a minimum, it's a penny, 2 pennies, whatever a consumer wants to set as the threshold. In my case, it might be $5, but if we're able to charge so that in order to initiate a call to me from someone who I don't know, there's a fee. Now, I love a way to press a button and have that money returned to the person if it turned out to be a legit call. But if we were to create tollways in our communication system so that consumers are protected by bad actors, that's a win. It's radical, but calling party pays is a concept which people understand for 40 years, so it's not new. Because the spam and the robocalling and so many abuses are just, it's like I can't take it anymore. And so I think whatever we can do to make quality of life better, because frankly, what blows my mind is in 2024, no one answers the phone anymore. That we're using apps maybe to communicate, but not the telephone. And so, the telephone to me was a place you could find family. We're used to, because the telephone, we were calling a location. These days we're calling a physical location. With mobility, we're calling someone's pocket. So anyway, I think it's.
So I was just going to
say
please finish, Jeff.
I was just going to say that maybe for a future broadband lunch, a broadband breakfast, we could have a carry-on conversation. I just want to thank everyone who's been tuning in about the conversation about the Pulver Order. And if you can make it to Washington on February 12th, please join us. We have a journal, by the way, if you'd like to take out a little ad because you did well by this, journal ads are always welcome. And really, I just want to share my love and support to Glenn and to Pillsbury and to his team for helping to change the world, because without Glenn and Bruce believing in what I was looking to do, none of this would have happened. And he's the only person I knew who would even listen to me. And I'm grateful to know him for all these years, and just grateful to be his friend. So thank you, Glenn.
Glenn, any final closing thoughts from you before we close out?
No, I'm very excited for February 12th. I think we're going to have some wonderful speakers, and I'm hoping to learn from everybody. There are just so many quality telecom lawyers that are still practicing, and thank God still alive, that will be there, that will get to sort of share stories and maybe hear some things that we weren't even aware of. So if this was of interest, I think it's even going to be better, the content on the 12th. So if you're in the DC area, it'd be great to see everybody and get everyone's, input on that. We really want it to be a collaborative event where folks engage. It's not a webinar. We're not going to just sit and talk to people. We really want everyone to participate and enjoy that. We're celebrating. We're not lecturing.
Well, unless Jeff, you've got any final words, come
Thank
to
you.
February 12th. The details are at pulver.com. I put them in the chat, and we have a link to it as well on broadbandbreakfast.com. On behalf of Jeff Pulver and Glenn Richards, I'm Drew Clark, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.